Welcome to another thrilling, exciting episode of On the Spectrum podcast. I am Nick.
I'm Steve.
And as always, when we start an episode, I always like to give a little bit of a, warning, something up at the very beginning of it of me and Steven are not experts in anything whatsoever. We are just two human beings who are on the autism spectrum, and we're going to talk about issues not only that concern the autism spectrum, but also concern us. Now, during the podcast, you may hear some language that you find offensive. That's okay. If you do find it offensive, comment, let us know. Wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a comment to us. We also have a Facebook page, a TikTok, and an Instagram account. You can always leave us a message with one of those. If there's something you like, if there's something you dislike, if there's a topic you want us to cover, or if you just want to say, hey, y'all, good job. Whatever you want to do, excellent. And that's my early warning.
Nice. So today, we're going to talk about autism as it's represented in the media. So that means like film, television, other forms of media. So like, I don't know, documentary, magazines, anything. So anywhere that autistic people are represented in media, mostly film and television though.
Mostly. So with that being our topic for today, let me ask you.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you, representation? Just as the general concept of representation, what does that mean for you?
I think the term is kind of amorphous, in my opinion, because like if you could say, well, we want autistic representation in television or talk about autistic representation, but what does that mean exactly? And the reason I say it's amorphous is I think it has different meanings to different people, especially with something like autism spectrum disorder, because there's a lot of different ways you can fall on the autism spectrum and different autistic traits and things you might have. And so when you portray a character as being autistic or somebody who's autistic is playing a character who's autistic, that might not be representative of everybody who's on the spectrum. So that's why to me, it's kind of like, I don't know, what do you mean by representation? It's the same thing. Like if you have a character on TV who's black, they don't represent every black person, but It's just having a person who is black.
So that's kind of the thing I find interesting about the conversation
like about tokenism, kind of.
Yeah. That's the kind of thing I find interesting about the idea and talking about representation in media, regardless of what kind of media it is, or just representation in our society about any given population, right? Because I don't think it's possible to give a true, honest representation that's going to represent all of anybody. And I think it kind of hinders people.
Especially if it's fiction.
Yeah, especially when it's fiction. Because generally the writer's writing it to make it work.
They're trying to make a compelling story. They're not trying to so it's one of those things where like, I think that we should have characters who are gay or trans and all that stuff. But to me, there's a difference between like having a character who's gay or a character who's trans versus that being their entire identity.
Right.
Like if the character is a compelling character and a good written character, but happens to be gay, that's different than if a character's entire personality or their entire character is just, they're gay.
Right.
Like that to me is more degrading.
Right.
I mean, I'm not a gay person, but I would like, if you had a character who's there and is just autistic, to me, it's like, okay, whatever. That's not a real fair representation of autistic people. But if you have a character who is compelling, but happens to be autistic,
right,
then they're not writing a character who's autistic. They're writing a character who happens to be autistic. And that's the difference for me.
I always find that the argument, or when people are complaining about, they see a certain character, say like Rain Man, and we'll use that as the first example. Dustin Hoffman playing Rain Man, autistic character.
Of course, you would bring up that one first because that's what everybody thinks of when they think of autistic people in movies.
But people have an issue with it because they're like, well, that doesn't represent all of us. Not all of us are great in one area. But I will say in this regard, though, isn't it better to have a character represent a group of people that is somewhat like that group, that is somewhat, or even at least just identifying of that group? Isn't it better to have that than not at all?
Well, I think it changes over time. So like at the time that Rain Man was made, autism was still not something that most people knew much about.
Right.
So the types of autistic characters that you would see would probably evolve over time. Just like if you have gay characters in the 90s, for instance, in sitcoms, a lot of characters that were gay were there for comedic relief.
Right.
They were just funny.
Just Jack on Will and Grace.
They were silly. But nowadays, when you have characters who are gay, they're a lot more complex and complicated. They're not just like, hey, I'm gay.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Their whole character is not about just being gay, which to me, I guess in a way, it kind of opens the door for those more complicated characters. But I still, to me, there's a big difference between the character who's just, like a stereotype of what people think a gay character is, or if they're there just for comedic relief, or having an autistic character who's just there and like a stereotypical, it's a white guy who likes to rock in the corner and blurts out weird shit.
Right. I mean, I do like the fact that there are more autistic characters out there. At the same time, I don't think any one of those characters is 100% of a representation of autism, because there is a huge wide range of autism, right? And most of the characters you see out there are generally on the level 1, low need, high function, whatever variation you want to say of that. They're generally of that side. And I read an article to prepare for this episode a little while ago, and it talked about how that the other side of autism, or people who have heavier support needs or more support needs, they're not usually represented in stuff. And I kind of understand why, though, because anybody who's at another part of the spectrum, they're like anybody who has higher needs, it's
be harder to write a character like that.
It's much harder to write that character, but also having that character engaged in the story is even harder than that.
It's like if you have a character who has Down syndrome,
right?
Like you'd have to have somebody who has Downs play the character,
right?
And depending on what level of support they're at,
right?
Like how well can you write the character first of all, as somebody who's doesn't have Downs, presumably writing it, who doesn't understand what it's like to have that,
right?
And then somebody portraying it, which would probably have to be somebody. And there's also like with Downs, there's a kind of not really a spectrum, but there's certain people who have more needs than others. Right. There's people who have Downs who function pretty well. And then there's people who need a lot more help.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the problem when you're writing a story, is you also have to make sure you're serving the story.
Yeah.
Right. So yes, I like the fact that there is representations of it, but I also think people go a little far when it comes to like critiquing those characters and the judgment they place on the character of whether that fits what autism is, or whether that fits what the African American community is, or whether that fits to being a woman who's an advocate for feminism or something. Whatever the representation they're looking to do, I think the overwhelming amount of judgment people place on it, like on some of the Instagram posts and the Reddit posts that I've read of people on the spectrum critiquing those kind of characters, or talking about how our representation is always the person who needs way more needs. But they're basically saying that they would rather have no representation then, or they want better representation. But the only true way to get really good representation would to be have somebody where our support needs are, which are kind of minimal, have somebody like us write it. But even then, we're not able to completely represent the entire spectrum that way.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of ways, when it comes to one of my kids, okay, one of my kids scripts a lot. And writing a character like that in a story is like making them a tertiary or an ancillary character in the story, because they can't really contribute to move that story along. Right? The other characters around them would have to make sure they're included somehow, but then that's not really a good representation of a compelling story for somebody who's autistic.
It sounds to me like you're just a bigot who doesn't want to see more autism in TV. That's what I'm getting from what you're saying.
Well, I also believe the purpose of a story is to kind of show us commonalities amongst humans and to give us something that we can all relate to in the sense of like...
There's a certain reason why
we're all human.
Certain stories are very popular.
Yeah.
And if I don't want to get all metaphysical on you,
okay.
But you're somebody who's into psychology, and I know that
yes.
you like some of the concepts like of Jung and stuff like that. But the
sure.
archetypes that his concept of archetypes, that human beings kind of are drawn to certain archetypes and archetypical stories.
Right.
So that's kind of interesting. Like that, there's certain themes that play out
right
throughout pretty much any story ever has certain archetypes that are repeated, right. And then we kind of live out some of those archetypes in real life.
Right. I mean, if we take the representation of like Atypical, like the Netflix show Atypical, some people have an issue with that show because they think that character was written with I honestly read this, too extreme of support needs. The story is based on the dude being on the spectrum and the struggles in which he has. So, of course, a lot of the episodes are going to talk about his struggle in situations more so than his necessary successes, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I get that. Like, even on The Good Doctor, right? The autistic doctor there, right? People are complaining that in a lot of episodes, he's written too literal. And not everybody on the spectrum is that literal. No, but it is pretty common that we're very literal.
Yeah.
And they just take that one step further with him being a doctor.
And also people who are on the spectrum who aren't as literal,
Mhm.
they might have had to work on that.
Right. Kind of
So-
like myself. Yeah, we're kind of invoking those masking skills sometimes to kind of move past that.
Yeah.
But what?
Nothing.
Okay.
No, there was a noise. There was a sound in my headphones, but the recording didn't pick it up. That's fine.
Okay.
It was a computer sound.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. Sorry. You had a look on your face and I thought,
No, I have,
Okay.
I usually turn off the system sounds
yeah.
in Windows. And
Yeah.
for some reason it's not off. So like there was a Windows notification
Oh.
sound. Went off in my headphones, but the people listening can't hear it. So.
No, they can't. But you
It
know what,
freaked me out
y'all?
for a second.
Sometimes we're going to deviate because we're going to like have a moment. So, all right.
It just freaked me out. That's all.
All right. Excuse me. But I mean, the entire concept of representation, like no matter what is being represented, there's a segment of that population who says that's not good enough. That's not really a representation of us. And I think maybe we should just not necessarily just be happy with whatever little we get from it, but we also need to take into consideration that this person who's writing it is writing a story. And it's the story that we can kind of connect with necessarily, not necessarily how great this person wrote the character.
Well, I
right?
looked up a bunch of examples of representation of autistic people.
Great.
And a lot of the stuff that comes up is actually focused more on the nonfiction.
Yes.
Like Love on the Spectrum.
Yep. Which I've watched both the American and Australian seasons.
The Autistic Brothers, which is a book.
Oh.
The Autistic Buddha.
All right.
It's a nonfiction novel about an autistic individual's journey to Germany and China and what he learned about the experience. Girls with Autism is a documentary.
Yep.
Let's see. Here's an interesting one. The Big Short, which is
Yes.
a film, but it's based on some things that actually happened.
Yeah,
Like
it stars Christian Bale.
Yeah. One of the characters, Michael Burry, who's a hedge fund manager,
Mhm.
is supposed to be on the autistic spectrum with Asperger's syndrome. So during the course of the film, it says it's never revealed but strongly implied.
Right.
Which I watched that film, but I don't remember picking that up.
That's the other thing I gotta say about representation is, to me, if a character doesn't specifically say they are part of X group and the character doesn't mention that that is a thing that is a big deal to them, kind of like bipolar characters, right? Like I've never once seen a bipolar character that was written well enough, in my opinion, that I could say that that represented any of us, let alone, the person that they wrote it. In that regard, though, I don't want to stop seeing bipolar characters, but at times lost my thought process. Oh, but at times people are like, oh, that character's bipolar. Oh, that character's autistic. Oh, that character's gay. Even though the character doesn't say it ever and it's not part of the story whatsoever. Kind of like with Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, right? When Big Bang Theory first came out, the writer said not necessarily were they thinking that he was on the spectrum or whatnot, but they've kind of adapted it since then. And I get he showed a lot of traits to it, but if the writer and the character don't ever say it and don't ever claim that that's what that person is, how can we say it's a bad representation of us?
Or even address it.
Right. Like, come on.
Like they never, like you could have an episode where they ask if the character is
Right.
autistic. Like, hey, have you ever thought about getting tested for autism?
Right.
And Sheldon would say whatever, but
Yeah, well, his mother did test him twice for being crazy. He says that multiple times in the show. I mean,
it sounds like something that you would do to an autistic kid.
Yeah. So it's the same thing with like LGBT characters, right? Either the character is written that that's the only thing about them, really, and that's the major thing about them, or it's almost not mentioned, but if like you have a male character who's a bit effeminate, people just kind of make some assumption. There's some historical figures that people have done that with too lately.
Saying they were gay.
What?
Saying they were gay.
Yeah.
Like Hitler.
I heard that one once before.
Because he, the theory behind that one is because he didn't really have a lot of, he was into, first of all, he had some weird sexual fetishes.
Yeah.
He was into like being pissed and shit on.
Okay.
And being abused physically. Mm. And he also apparently didn't have a lot of female sexual partners. So there was like some type of theory that he was gay. He also apparently had confessed homosexual desires to people he was close with, allegedly. So I don't know.
But even
who
if
cares?
Well, no, I mean, that's true too. Like, whatever, that's not even a big part of who he is. But let's take what you just said as an example. Like, he didn't have a lot of female sexual partners, so somehow that means he must lean in different directions. And then he confessed to having homosexual desires, but he never acted on any that we know of. We have no evidence to support that he ever acted on it. And he didn't say that he was questioning. He just supposedly admitted to somebody.
Oh, there were women who claimed that they had slept with him. And they said that some of them were apparently disgusted because of the things he wanted them to do. But they were like, he was asking to be physically abused to the point where people felt uncomfortable performing the acts with him. I don't know how that makes him gay.
I don't either. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, in the same regard, when it comes to like past people being diagnosed with mental health issues, I have a problem with it too, because they were not tested by anybody with any level of training. It's just, we're looking at their writings posthumously. We're looking at other people's observation of their behavior posthumously. That doesn't mean that they are. That doesn't mean that this person had OCD or bipolar or schizophrenia.
Well, you hear a lot like Einstein. People think Einstein might have been autistic.
Right.
But there's a lot of things in his life that would point to possibly. But we can't say for sure.
Right.
He did really poorly in school. He had a lot of social issues, but he was very smart. He just didn't function well within normal social norms and boundaries. He also apparently was a mess, personally, which some people think
very disorganized.
Yeah.
So with that, because I also heard Leonardo da Vinci was probably on the spectrum, and just because somebody's high intelligence doesn't mean they're on the spectrum. Like, anybody
who is a genius to art history is now autistic,
supposedly.
Although I do think Nikola Tesla might have been.
He might have been,
because same thing with him. A lot of the stuff, and you hear about his life.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that kind of point in that direction. Just like, he didn't have any friends. He had trouble getting along with people. He had poor social skills.
Yeah.
He got obviously super obsessed with whatever projects he was working on.
Sure.
He also was one of those people who thinks in pictures, like where they were able to, he would be able to build things in his head without actually having to write them out and then actually build the machine. Like, he could build a working machine, test it in his brain. And if it didn't work, he would re-engineer it in his brain before he ever actually put anything together.
Okay. Well, how do we know all that happened?
I mean, how do we know anything about anybody in history? That's what's reported about him.
Right. But it's just, you're talking about all this internal processing stuff. And even if he said, that's how I do things, that's not even necessarily.
Well, I don't know for a fact. I'm just going based on what history, what people say about him in books and in biographies.
Isn't he also the same guy who married a bird or a pigeon or something like that?
I don't know about that.
Okay. I could have sworn, maybe I'm thinking of the wrong guy, but there was some like science specialty guy who like supposedly married a pigeon or had a relationship with a pigeon or some shit, some bird. Anyway, off topic of gossip.
One of the ones that kept coming up when I was looking at a list was Temple Grandin.
Yes.
Because she's featured in media frequently, like on documentaries, on videos and stuff like that.
There's a recent biopic made about her too.
Yeah. So she's an autistic, and she's somebody who is probably, most of her life was higher needs, like who, she fell in a different part of the spectrum, I think, than you would see people normally, because she was, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure as a kid, she spent many years not being able to communicate at all.
Okay.
She was nonverbal
for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she had trouble communicating for a long time.
Bless you. Dominus patere sensation.
because of the way that her brain works. She
Yeah.
doesn't she doesn't think the same way a lot of other people do, and the way she processes what people say.
Right.
So it took her longer to adapt to the way other people communicate. At least from what I understand of her, I could be wrong, but
I don't know enough about her.
yeah, she was.
I know who she is.
She definitely was somebody who you'd consider, a higher level, whatever you want to call it, like a level 2 or level 3.
Oh, okay.
But
Well, probably level 2 because she's actually able to completely verbalize.
right. But she spent a long time struggling. She was somebody
Right.
who would have needed more support than you or I.
Yes.
But she's gotten herself to the point where she's
Yeah.
not like that. She's able to communicate, but she
I mean,
definitely
she did go to school. She did get a degree, so
yeah, she does. She is more noticeably autistic, if that's not offensive to say.
it's probably offensive to somebody. But come on, fuck, it's true.
It's because of the way she speaks.
yes,
So she doesn't mask as much, is what I'm saying.
I'm pretty sure she gave up the whole idea of trying to mask.
Yeah. So that's what I mean by she's more obviously autistic, is
Yeah.
that when she speaks, she doesn't mask. She speaks very monotone.
Right?
A lot of the things that you would see like stereotypically portrayed for like a guy who's autistic,
yeah.
just the very monotone. I like cabbage and cabbage tastes good. You want some
He said cabbage tastes good.
pizza? Like,
Well, no, I get what you're saying. And if anybody's interested, we do have on our Facebook page, we do have a small video of Temple Grandin, who is a very smart, interesting woman. She is also a wonderful advocate for autism. Some
And
people
animals.
might argue that or whatever because of past statements that she has made. But you know what? She's one of the most visible people for autism today. And so I think on that, we should kind of give some respect because without her out there talking about autism, the rest of us might not be where we want to be, and there might not be as much representation in media if it wasn't for people like her stepping forward and being a face of autism.
she also is an animal advocate.
Yes, big time.
She likes animals.
Yeah. So here's my question for you, because I actually thought about this earlier today because I was starting to rewatch Love on the Spectrum US. And have you ever watched any of it, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're watching that show, do you think the collection of people that they grabbed, okay, for that show, do you think that collectively they are a good representation of autism?
I think it's pretty close.
Or do you think that they grabbed those people specifically for the interestingness of where they are on the spectrum?
I think it's probably a mixture of both.
Okay.
They have a good range, but it's still they don't have anybody who is they don't have anybody who's, I guess, what you would call like level 3
Yeah.
necessarily. They don't have anybody who is at the level where they need complete support to do everything.
Right.
But then again, it would also be kind of hard to have a dating show with somebody like that.
And actually that kind of gets to the point about that I was making about representation of like, it wouldn't be a show that people would want to watch or entertaining in any way, or even be able to get enough people to watch it if we had somebody who just, sat around, jumped around and scripted all day. Like, and that person probably wants somebody to love and care for them as well. It's just, it wouldn't be a show that people would want to watch as much. And
Most
that
of the
is
people
part
in
of the
that
job.
show are somewhere in the middle to higher
Mhm.
functioning. So they're varying degrees of where they fall on the
Yeah.
spectrum, but it's more like kind of level 2, level 1.
Yes, relatively in that
You
area.
have some of them
Yeah.
who are who I guess would be better passing as normies,
Yes, better
and some of
passing.
them who are more obviously autistic, for lack of a better term.
Right.
But they are still able to go on the dates and
Right.
etc. But so when you say is it a fair representation? That's why I said kind of, because but I don't know what you would do with people who are very low functioning. I don't know
Right.
what you would do with them on a dating show.
Well, that's exactly true. I think the same thing goes for every story possible. So like when I read in the autism communities, when I read about people saying this person and that person is not a good representation, and then also with the amount of
Wait a minute. How can you say someone's not a good representation if they are autistic?
that part I don't understand.
So if you are autistic, is say they were to put me in a show as a representative of someone who's autistic, and you say, well, he's not a good representative of, well, I am autistic.
Yeah.
So how can you say I'm not a good representation? I exist.
Right. But that's what people are doing. And there's actually very few people. So another thing about representation, and I'm going to go on a slight bit of a rant on this, because a lot of community groups, theater community groups in this area love to talk about and put on their Facebook page, put on their websites that they're inclusive and all that jazz, and they want to do equal representation for people. But every time somebody tries to put on that curious case of the, what is it, Boy with a Dog or whatever that play is.
I have no idea what that is.
It's a story about an autistic kid. Nobody's looking for an autistic kid to play that kid in the story. Like a theater in a town I grew up in Connecticut, I saw a post that they were going to do that play, and they posted who was the cast. And so I just straight up asked, is the person playing the autistic kid autistic? And their response was no. And then I replied with, shouldn't we be representing the autism community with an autistic person? There are autistic actors. And they didn't respond to me, but it kind of made me think about it, because at the same time, like all of the other moments and things that we talk about representation in media and Hollywood in stories, when it comes to playing,
it's like if you were to do Roots with an all-white cast,
right? Like that would be aft of a story, right? That'd be a horrible.
I mean,
idea.
that's an extreme example. It's not really a one-to-one, but I'm saying that like you wouldn't cast
right
like a character who's supposed to be a slave as a white dude,
right? Like you wouldn't do the life story of LeVar Burton as like Chris Evans. You wouldn't have Chris Evans play him.
Right. Which reminds me of the thing people were freaking out about Cleopatra. Which, so I actually understand the argument as to why people are annoyed with that. It's, in fact, a lot of the people I've seen complaining about it are autistic people, because we like things to be kind of like factually correct. Right. And they're having a black woman play Cleopatra, which doesn't make sense because Cleopatra was Greek.
Right. She was Mediterranean.
She would have been she would have looked Mediterranean. She would have been like an olive skin. She was from Macedonia. She would have looked like a person from that area.
Right.
Which I really don't give a shit at the end of the day that if they have a black woman playing it. I think the reason why people were complaining is because Netflix is calling it a documentary. So if you're doing a documentary about Cleopatra, how can you have a documentary and then you decide to change the character, not the character, but change the historical figure of Cleopatra to somebody that she wasn't? Not only that, but then there's people in the documentary saying that she could have been black, even though all historical evidence points to the fact that she wasn't, and she was part of the Tamelic dynasty, which was all Greek. So whatever. Like, I don't really care, because that's one of those things to me where, like, I don't give a shit if you make a character black or white or whatever, but if you have a historical figure, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, why would you change the race of a historical figure?
Right.
Or whatever. Who cares?
I agree. Okay.
Like, that to me, that's like when you take inclusivity and you make it weird. Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
it's like, oh, Genghis Khan, we're going to have a, I don't know. That's like making Genghis Khan Indian. Like, oh, we're going to have an Indian guy play Genghis Khan. Why? Well, Indian people aren't represented well. But yeah, but it's Genghis Khan.
Right. I agree with you.
You should have like a Mongolian person play Genghis Khan, not fucking...
If we're going to truly do proper representation in Hollywood, in entertainment, right, then we got to go all the way with it and have it be truly representative.
People say that they care about that stuff, but they don't. Especially when it comes to certain things. Yeah. I've dealt with theaters too who said that they were all for diversity, inclusion, and shit. And then when I brought up like mental disorders, mental disabilities, neurodivergent people, they were like, they didn't really have a response. It was more of like, well, we have somebody who works for us who's maybe autistic. Okay.
I mean, honest to God, they only want to be inclusive and they only want to give representation for whatever, topic happens to be in the media at the time. Like, honestly, because even theater groups I've worked with, like recently somebody did a post about the level of commitment to the theater show you're in and all of this kind of stuff, but it's not taking into account that people have stuff going on. Like if you're somebody who suffers from a mood disorder, right? There's going to be times where you can't show up to the theater to rehearse that day because of, complications with it, because of struggles that you have with it. But they want to talk about how people need to just be committed to it, period, regardless of what's going on. Come on. Like, let's take into account that these are human beings, especially if it's community theater, because it's a voluntary thing.
Well, in the theater that I was just complaining about was actually a paid theater.
Yeah, I know.
So it's a theater that I had dealt with that actually pays their actors. It's a professional theater.
Right.
And they posted a job listing. I'm not going to say the name of the theater.
Yeah.
I applied for a job. They said that they were encouraging applicants to apply who were underrepresented groups.
Right.
And so when I wrote my cover letter, I explained to them that I asked, I mentioned that I was autistic, and I asked in my cover letter if they had other autistic people working there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just saying it would be nice to have some sort of, if you care about underrepresented groups. I listed some stats about like unemployment for autistic people in areas that were underrepresented in, like theater and stuff like that. So I put that stuff in there, and their response to me was basically that that while they appreciated me applying, but they didn't really they were looking for somebody a little bit different, something along those lines. So in other words, they were looking for somebody who's more visibly different.
Right. Somebody they can put on a poster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. So in other words, you're full of shit.
Right.
Because you said underrepresented groups.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, let's say they did hire somebody who they were just looking for somebody who was like a different skin color or whatever. If you look at their staff listing, their whole staff is like people of color.
Yeah.
Which is fine. I don't give a fuck.
Right.
But like you're saying that you care about underrepresented groups. You don't have a lot of white people working there. You have mostly people of color, which is awesome. But you're gonna like, what about people who are neurodivergent or other types of groups? So you're saying you're looking for underrepresented groups. Well, it looks like you're trying to have people of color, women of color, LGBTQ people.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. What about neurodivergent people?
Right.
No, don't care.
And I will say, when it comes to it, like I've always had this conversation with a friend about representation, because he always feels like his group isn't represented a lot, which is true. And when we've had these conversations, I kind of asked him about like, why is it so important? Right. And one of the things that he always kind of says about it is because it allows him to see a different version, and allows him to see that he's not alone, and allows him to see that, the way he does things or the way he behaves is okay. And so basically looking for a level of acceptance.
Yeah, it's the same thing like why, it's nice for Black kids to be able to see Black people represented in the media. You want to see people who are like you.
Right.
So and I think that's important.
When it comes to like autistic folks, and when it comes to people with mental health differences, a lot of it sounds like to me, and I could be totally wrong, could be misreading what people are saying, but it sounds a lot like they're looking for acceptance, and they're trying to see something to make them feel okay with themselves. And in my personal opinion, I think they're going about it the wrong way. Because they're looking for validation and acceptance and approval from an external source. And I think we need to look, especially us being autistic, I think we need to look at ourselves first, and we need to accept. We need to love. We need to own us for us. You know what I mean? We have to accept ourselves first. We have to love ourselves first. We have to own what it is, who we are as a person first, before we say everybody needs to show me love and acceptance.
By the way, in a side topic, before I came here today, I was at a store, and I told the girl behind the counter that she's like, "Oh, what are you up to today? You seem like you're always busy," because I go into this store frequently. I was like, "Oh, I'm going to record a podcast or whatever." And I was like, "I know everybody and their mother has a fucking podcast, and I don't think I'm important or whatever." And she's like, "Oh, no, it's fine." She's like, "You seem like really busy all the time." And I was like, "But we are talking about something that not as many other podcasts are talking about."
Right.
And she's like, "Oh, what's that?" And I was like, "Autism." And she said, "Isn't everybody a little autistic?"
Oh, no, not everybody is a little autistic. Thank you. But I will say, actually, because a lot of people have a real hard time with that, or they have a hard time when somebody says, "You don't look autistic." I will say this. If you're a person who gets upset by hearing either one of those things from another human being, I do need you to understand that that human being in that given moment, when they say stuff like that, they're actually attempting to show some level of interest of things, trying to engage you in something. And as far as we go, there isn't a lot of us. There really, statistically, there is actually not a lot of people who are autistic. Okay. So if somebody is saying something like that, well, you don't really look all that autistic, take that opportunity to talk to them. Take that opportunity to educate maybe. Like, and I'm not saying take hours out of your life to do it, but their ignorance is understood because they don't have a lot of experience. And even if they did have an experience.
I was getting a coffee, so I didn't feel like explaining to her
Right.
that it's impossible for everybody to be a little autistic. But I was like, I'm not going to fight this battle right now. I'm just going to get my coffee and leave.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like, as I've been going online for our Instagram.
I wasn't offended, by the way. I just thought it was funny.
As I've been going online for our Instagram and our TikTok and kind of posting and talking to people and some of our Facebook too, like there's a lot of things people are saying are autistic traits or because of their autism. And really it's human stuff and the person's autistic. Like one person in particular said that their love of being creative is part of their autism. And there might be something to that, but humans are creative. Like,
maybe you're
autistic,
obsessed with something you're creating. Maybe your fixation could be like if you're working on an artistic project and you're hyper fixated on it, maybe that could be related to the autism, but creativity isn't an autistic trait.
No. And like having anxiety.
There's a lot of autistic people who are not creative at all.
Right.
There's a lot of autistic people who are more like, if you want to go into stereotypes, like the math people who are maybe more into STEM, who maybe are not artistic, but they're like hyper fixated on science or math or something like that, engineering.
And are all of us hyper fixated on something? Not necessarily, but actually, yes.
I tend to.
We are.
But
as
what I
people.
fixate on, I get hyper fixated on things for a little while, and then I change to get hyper fixated on something else for a while.
In this kind of vein of this conversation we're talking about, it does kind of bother me when everybody just wants to say that everyone on the spectrum is different. No, there's a reason why we're all on the spectrum. There's a reason why we can all identify as being on the spectrum, because there are certain traits that we all do, or at least relatively all do.
Tism radar.
Yeah, like
you have tism sonar.
I heard about the other day too. Kind of like gaydar, but autism dar. Yeah. Anyway. But that's why we can all say we're on the spectrum, because there are certain traits that we all do. And like people want to argue the diagnostic criteria for it, but that's how we all know we're on the spectrum. Otherwise, we're human like everybody else. Because I know tons of NTs who also have something that they're an expert in, or have something that they have a lot of knowledge in, and they focus on something a great deal for a while. They do that too, not necessarily to the degree somebody who's autistic will, and maybe they're going to focus on something and have a passion for something, but that doesn't, it's still human traits.
I have two questions for you.
Sure.
First question is, what would you like to see different as far as autistic representation in fiction and even maybe nonfiction? If you were to see it in like a movie or television, what would you like to see that maybe you haven't seen or that you would like to see more of?
I think I would, talking about this topic, having this as our topic today, I think I would want somebody who, and I'm going to say this very selfishly, I think I would want to see somebody who is on the spectrum, who is a lot like me and you, who are performers, who are actors and comedians, stuff like that. I think I would want to see that. I
would like to see somebody who is late diagnosed, but see what it was like before they were diagnosed.
Right.
Like through their teenage years, maybe their 20s, and some of the struggles of going through living while being that, but not knowing.
Right. I agree. I like the idea of that too. And we are going to cover that at
some of the
topic being late diagnosed and the changes.
Some of the self-esteem issues or the self-doubt that comes along with that, with not understanding why you are the way you are, or why it seems like you're different from other people. Yeah. But then, just for me, I used to fluctuate back and forth between thinking there was something wrong with me and just thinking that everyone else was fucking retarded, and that I was the one who had all the answers. I'm the one who's right. Everyone else is wrong. They're just fucking idiots.
Yeah.
But you know,
I
at some
used to feel the
point,
same way.
it snaps in your head. Well, it can't be that everyone else is wrong because that doesn't make any sense.
Well, because I'm the common denominator, so it must be me.
Right. So, but you fluctuate back and forth. At least I used to, because I would get kind of depressed and feel like I was the problem. And then I would start to get kind of angry about it and just be like, fuck everybody else. So kind of flop back and forth between those two things. But then once I realized that I was autistic, I was like, oh, okay, a lot of this makes sense now.
Interesting enough, I've actually had 2 points in my life where I had to kind of look at and reflect on prior to a diagnosis or prior to an acceptance of something about me and seeing the way I was prior to knowing it. And then after, like when I got diagnosed with bipolar, things prior to that started to just make sense to me and like, oh, that's why this happened. Oh, this is why I acted that way. Oh my God, this is what was motivating me because of this mood shift or whatnot. Same thing when it came to autism. When I finally started to accept the autistic side, same idea. I started to, oh my God, things make so much more sense to me. And then I was able to accept those moments that were a struggle, that were a problem in my past, even relationship wise. I was able to accept those moments more when knowing it. So I agree. I would like to see pre and post late diagnosis.
The reason, because I haven't really seen, you see a lot of like an atypical, for instance, you know, he already has a diagnosis.
Yeah. At a
he's
very young age.
more obviously autistic, has bigger issues with like sensory issues than you or I would have.
Right.
Like, so with him, it's much more obvious. But with someone like you and I, it's maybe not as obvious, which is why we were diagnosed late. But there was still a lot of consequences and struggles that became as a result of that. So you haven't really seen a lot of that.
I'll actually say something about that character on Atypical. And maybe this is just foolish me in this regard, but anytime I see that character talk to somebody or interact with another character in that show and he's not wearing the headphones, I don't see anything like odd or different or weird about his interactions with people. Like even his speech, I don't find anything different about it.
There's certain things about him that I find some of the stuff about his character relatable.
Right.
In it, like some of the things I'm like, oh, I've been there, or I felt the same way as him, so I relate to him sometimes.
Right.
But other times, not.
But then the second I see him put on the headphones, I'm immediately like, oh, yeah, okay. There you go, autistic. But I don't see it otherwise. I mean, I don't believe that the actor is actually autistic on that
Some of the
show.
meltdown stuff is relatable.
Oh, yeah. Oh, the meltdown stuff, yeah. And of course, they dramatize it a little bit more.
Well, it's fucking television.
Yeah, it's a show. It's got to be compelling. It's got to be interesting in some way. I actually really like how Michael Rappaport, who's the actor who plays the dad, I actually really like the character and the way Michael Rappaport as an actor chooses to emote and connect in those scenes. Because like, I think as autistic kids, we would all want him as a dad. He's just trying to understand. He knows he doesn't have all the answers. He knows he doesn't understand it very well, but he just wants to love and support his son. And so I actually really like those interactions. I mean, I also got my own, well, quite frankly, I have daddy issues to a degree. And so watching this awesome dad interact with his autistic son and try his best to accept it, like still not being able to understand it really all that well, but still accept his son and still try to support and defend and protect his son is a really kind of touching thing.
The connection he had with the teacher or the therapist, the one he kind of had a crush on.
Yeah,
because
the therapist
that reminded me a lot of things that happened to me when I was younger.
Okay.
Kind of in a situation, some of the awkward social situations I got myself into.
Yeah.
So
I will say though that like one thing that I rarely ever see for autistic characters is when they have to deal with being misinterpreted as being rude or an asshole or something to that effect. I rarely see that on shows like that or in stories like that. Like even on Good Doctor, like people let him know that he might have crossed the line when he said something, but nobody's like, you're an asshole. I mean, granted, it's on ABC, so I don't think anybody's going to call him an asshole. But like, and maybe they have. I haven't watched a hell of a lot of episodes of Good Doctor because quite honestly, I find the show dull. But that's my personal preference. A lot of people love that show. I'm not saying it's a bad writing or acting or any of that. I think the kid who plays the Good Doctor is a good actor. Granted, he's also not autistic, supposedly. But I just, those are moments to me that would actually represent being on the spectrum more. So it's not even necessarily the character being written a certain way or behaving a certain way, but it's more of how others interact with them and how they act or react
some of the
to them.
Miscommunications or the misunderstanding.
Yeah. Like I would much rather see those moments than to see like the best prototype of an autistic character. I'd rather see the interactions displayed better and being more realistic.
So my second question for
Yes.
you
Oh yeah, you had 2, didn't you?
is if there was going to be a movie made or a television show made about you,
Wow.
what non-autistic actor would you want to play you?
What non-autistic actor?
Yeah.
Well, for one, because I'm an actor, if somebody's going to make a movie out of me, I'd like to play me, egotistically speaking. But
It kind of defeats the purpose of the question.
I know it really did, and I'm so sorry, but I went there. So that's a really good question. Who would I want to have played me?
I think I know who you would. I thought I knew who you would say, but
actually, if I could pick any actor in the known world, whether alive or dead, I think the person I'm gonna pick a living actor. I think the person who I'd want to play me, who I think here's also an egotistical thing, who I think could play me. Not that it'd be difficult to play me, but to play me, I think Jason Bateman.
Yeah.
Would be an actor that could do
Lauren's
it really
a big fan of him.
Yeah, I am too. I really love his podcast. It's called Smartless. Him, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett talk with other actors and directors and friends of theirs. You should check out the podcast. I'm a big fan of it.
Will Arnett's pretty funny.
He is. He's a very funny guy. But I think Jason Bateman would be a good idea.
I thought you were going to say Robin Williams.
To play me?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Robin Williams. I used to love watching his stuff, and a lot of people like watch the way I perform on a stage, especially when we're doing our improv show, and like think I draw a lot of influence from Robin Williams. But I think Robin Williams would take playing me in a very different direction because of who I actually am, when I'm not on a stage.
You, by the way, since you mentioned Will Arnett,
yes,
have you seen Murderville?
I have.
Oh, I thought that show was interesting. A lot of it's improvised too. Mm-hmm. So
a hell of a lot of it. He actually talks about it on his show a lot.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was pretty funny.
Well, when I say a lot, I mean, they plug their stuff, but they don't. I watched
all of it. I thought it was pretty funny, but I appreciate that a lot of it's improvised.
Me too.
And a lot of times the guest actors have no fucking clue what's going on, which makes it funnier.
I will say this because I do find it interesting that me and you are able to do improv as well as we have. Now, there is that total autistic improv group, Asperger's Are Us, Asperger's Are Us, if I remember correctly, the name.
And we have a hard enough time getting a group together to begin with. I don't know if we limit ourselves to just autists, if that would be a viable option for us. But
they do that, and it's four guys who travel around the country and stuff. There's even a movie about them, a documentary about them.
I think I've seen that.
Yeah, and I mean, they're with us in that regard because they do improv too, and we do it. But I find it interesting, autistic people doing improv, because yes, we're really good at associations, and yes, we're really good at connecting things and having patterns and seeing the game of things, right? The game of the
pattern recognition.
Yeah, pattern recognition. Yes, we're good at all that stuff, but I find it very interesting because improv, you have to be open and vulnerable and readily available and in the moment. And we have a hard time focusing. I mean, yes, we hyperfixate on something, but we also seem to have some attention issues there. Although there's a lot of folks who are on the spectrum who also have ADHD, and I get that. I don't know. I just find it interesting that we do so well at improv. Granted, I say we do so well only compared to the people we know that do improv. I don't know how good we actually are in the world of improv.
Yeah. Well, I think when we saw Colin, that we could have had some fun with that. But
what?
When we saw Colin Mockery.
Oh yeah. Because we just
would
saw
have had
him.
some fun if I'd been up on stage with him. But
I think it would have been hilarious if you'd been able to go up on stage.
I think that I would have been able to keep up with him. I'm not saying it would have been as good as him,
right?
But I think I would have been able to keep up in the scene.
I mean, he's also been doing it for like 40 years or so. I mean, he's absolutely wonderful at it.
I definitely would have done better than the people who had no experience, who were hypnotized. Yeah. But
you know how we talk about being a good beginner? Yeah. I actually decided to watch that show with that in mind, of being a good beginner. So not sitting there and critiquing his improv or checking out the rules and seeing if he's doing this or that, but looked at it as being a good beginner in the sense of like putting that stuff aside and just watching it for what it is. And even with that, he was so good Like he held on to that premise of that story, no matter what anybody else said to him, and just kept it rolling. And it was so cool to see.
Tried to keep the reality of the scene.
Yeah.
Keep that going.
Yeah.
Even if somebody said something that kind of broke it or took it out of it, he tried to bring it back to the whatever the story or the theme was.
Right. I would love to be that good at it at some point. But yeah, to answer your question, because it's still kicking in my head and rotating in my head a little bit, I would like to see somebody who's on the spectrum like we are, where we're at, where we have relationships and we're maintaining employment and we're managing an
Well, I was also
improv
asking
group.
who you would want to play you.
Yeah. Well, Jason Bateman.
I don't know who I'd want to play me, but this is not a good answer. But for some reason, the first person that comes to mind is Jim Carrey, and I don't know why.
For you?
Yeah.
Huh.
Because I really don't know who would be someone good to play me, but I just think he's a fun, interesting guy. I don't think he's like an amazing actor, but I was like,
you know who I think, and not just because you have a similarity in the way you guys look, but I actually think Zach Galifianakis would probably be a good idea. I mean, you guys look kind of similar, but like I mean this honestly and seriously. I think Zach Galifianakis could play you even in the serious stuff.
Have you seen that clown show he did?
No.
What the fuck is it called?
Oh.
There's a show he did where he plays a clown.
Yeah.
I think you would like it. It's really fucking weird.
Okay.
Well, if you like him. But.
Well, I do. I would like to see him do something serious. I think he probably has done a serious role at some point.
He has done serious stuff.
I could probably fathom seeing him or Nick Offerman. I think Nick Offerman would do a good job of you too. Because Nick Offerman has kind of that. I mean, he's expressive in his face, but not
gay Ron Swanson and
a lot, right?
Gay Ron Swanson in The Last of Us.
What? I have no idea what you just said.
Baskets. Baskets. That's the show where he plays a clown.
Oh, okay.
You would probably like that show.
What the fuck is Baskets?
It's a show where he plays a clown. He's a classically trained clown. He learned in French clown college. And he flunked out of French clown college because he didn't know French.
What in any of that description makes you think I would like that? What of that description?
Because it's funny in a really weird way.
Okay.
I don't know. Louis C.K.'s in it. Zach Galifianakis. Jonathan Kreisel? I don't know who that is.
But. So getting back on...
Louis Anderson plays his mom.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Louis Anderson plays his mother in that show. He plays a woman, and he doesn't even try to act like a woman, which makes it funnier. He's wearing like dresses, and he's got a wig on with long hair, but he just talks with his normal Louis Anderson voice. Right. He's like, "Hey, son, why are you a clown?"
I just thought of something when it came to representation. Because I get why people want to have it and stuff like that, because they want to see people like themselves achieve well or do well, or just want to see stories based around people that look like them and stuff. I've never been a person who watched a story where that was like, that got me more into the story.
It depends, I think. Sometimes it has, if there's something about the character that I find super relatable, but at the same time, like if there's a character that I think is a compelling character and it's just a good story, I'll still enjoy it the same way. It doesn't matter if the lead character is nothing like me. That could be a black woman as the lead character, and I probably have nothing in common with that person. But if the story is entertaining, it's like,
well, and also it's a human being, right? There's something we can connect with because they're a human being, right? Going through a situation, going through something. I think we can connect that way, and I think a lot of the times people forget that. I think that's a little lost when it comes to this push for representation and things, is we forget that the other person we're watching, regardless of the way they look, their background, whatnot, they're still a human being. And so there's still something that we can all relate to. And I think we get lost in our labels. We get lost in our identifiers in that, because these are still people. I mean, to give kind of an example, and this is something that Ian asked me once upon a time, because I really enjoyed watching Best Man. Do you know the movie?
No.
It's a group of African-American friends, and one's getting married. And all of these friends are together, and it's about them knowing each other for a really long time and some situations that happened along the way. And like Taye Diggs is in it. Terrence Howard is in it. I always Chestnut is Morris Chestnut, I think his name is. No, I could be wrong on his first name, but Chestnut is his last name. He's in it. And then, oh my God, I always forget the fourth guy, even though I'm a really big fan of him as an actor, but I never remember his name. He was also in Oz. But anyway, the four of them as friends, and then they're the female characters in it as well. Who, off the top of my head, I can't remember the name of any of them, although they were all amazing actors and have done a lot of stuff, but I can't remember any of their fucking names. Jesus. Anyway, so I once told Ian that I'd watched that movie, and he was like, well, I mean, it's a bunch of African-American males. Like, did you like the movie? And I was like, yeah, it's a really good movie. It was really well written. It was well acted. I really liked the director for it. I think he's also the writer to it. I don't remember 100%, but like he would ask me stuff about like that movie. Like, could you identify with the characters? And yeah, could I identify with how they grew up or dealing with racism or discrimination in their life and all that kind of stuff? No,
yeah, I mean, I really related to Boys in the Hood. That was my
wow.
I'm kidding. I have seen that movie though, Boys in the Hood.
Yeah, me too.
Thought it was a good movie.
But like, I watch movies because it's humans and it's human experience, right? Like.
Yeah. I mean, I really connected with American History X.
Oh,
I mean, that really
touched
me.
Just because you're racist.
No.
But no, it's because you love curb stomping. No. I don't know. Like the whole thing about and maybe it's because I'm a white male in this society. Maybe that's why I don't necessarily get the representation thing as much. But I will say, even being autistic, like I'm not as hard up to see autistic characters because, for one, I can't imagine. I'm not a great writer, but I can't imagine somebody's going to create this great, wonderful story of like 5 autistic friends.
I just remembered, actually, there was a film with a character that's exactly like you.
Uh-huh.
It's called I Am Sam.
Oh. Wow. As you were saying it, like that's the movie that came to mind.
I Am Sam. We didn't talk about that.
Wow.
Is he supposed to be autistic or is he retarded?
I don't know. He's probably MR.
So I looked up a list
or
of
DD as it's properly nowadays.
Because I looked up
delayed.
I looked up a list of autistic characters in movies, and it's listed Sean Penn. It says story of an autistic man living independently and functioning well in the real world until his life changes drastically when he becomes a father and is left to care for. So it said he's supposed to be autistic.
Okay. So then
I mean, his character seemed kind of
more needy than we are.
Well, I mean, I thought his character was mentally retarded. I didn't know he was.
Man,
I didn't know he was autistic.
I get we use that word at times.
Sorry,
but like
I thought his character was DD.
Yeah, there you
go. I mean, I guess the character could be autistic, but then again, it's Sean Penn, so he maybe doesn't know what it's like to be autistic. So
he may or may not be.
But do you think that's a good movie?
I thought it was a great movie. I mean, Sean Penn's an amazing actor. I thought it was a great movie.
Wait a minute. This list also says that Gilbert Grape's brother is autistic. He's not autistic. I thought he was MR too.
What?
What's eating Gilbert Grape?
Right.
Arnie. He's autistic. I thought he was MR too.
Yeah, no, he's autistic.
Oh.
Leonardo DiCaprio plays an autistic kid.
Oh, I thought he was supposed to be MR.
Years ago, I thought that too, but I've read a bunch of stuff since then, and no, he's just on a different part of the spectrum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
hey, have you ever watched Johnny Depp? And this is kind of a side note, but not really. Have you ever watched Johnny Depp in interviews and thought, "Huh, yeah, you're autistic"?
No,
I don't know. There's just something about like his facial expressions and something about the way he talks, and sometimes how he I don't know, seems to be in his own little headspace during interviews. That kind of makes me think he could be.
I know there's a lot of actors that people think might be or are, but
yeah,
who knows?
Yeah.
Is there anybody who's openly autistic?
That's an actor?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's
I thought Bill Murray at one point said he was on the spectrum.
I mean, that kind of makes sense. And also why people think he's an asshole.
Well, yeah, there's that too.
Dan Aykroyd, it says, is.
Oh, yeah?
Daryl Hannah, Anthony Hopkins, Woody Allen, Jerry Seinfeld. I don't know if I believe that.
Well, I mean, I can definitely understand the Anthony Hopkins.
It says he believes he is, but he hasn't had a medical diagnosis.
Well, hell, self-diagnosis is valid for our people.
Anthony Hopkins, it says that he's not, so I don't know why he came up on the list. David Byrne, that one kind of makes sense.
David Byrne?
Yeah.
Which one's David Byrne?
He's from the Talking Heads.
Oh, yeah, lead singer of Talking Heads.
Yeah.
Oh, I could definitely see that.
Stallone. I don't know if I need to see that one.
Although, let me say this, though. As we're saying that we can see it or not, whether we believe it or not, it doesn't matter. Whether they believe it or not is actually probably more important.
Tim Burton, it says.
Something.
But Tim Burton would make sense to me if you've ever heard about the way that he directs and the way. So I could see it there. The way people describe him.
Yeah.
It seems like he might have some of those traits, but who knows? But he's not an actor. He's a director.
Well, still, he's in entertainment.
But some people who worked with him have actually liked his attention to detail.
Yes.
He gets like hyper fixated on specific details in his movies that he wants a certain way. So that to me says maybe, but who knows? You don't have to be autistic to get fixated on something.
Right.
But I don't know. So before we wrap up this episode, I just wanted to mention that a lot of the things that you were talking about and concerned about as far as like representation and being in movies or being able to act in groups and all that stuff.
Right.
I just want to let everyone listening know that this will no longer be a problem for Nick soon. I'm happy to say that it has now been going on about a month since I gave Nick my autistic elixir, the cure, the anti-MMR, if you will. And the results have been astounding. I mean, they speak for themselves. Nick is getting less fixated on things. He's having less meltdowns. His sensory issues are pretty much gone. His intelligence has decreased quite a bit, but he's much more pleasant to be around. And I can say, maybe within the next 6 months, we will be able to distribute the cure to everyone. And I just wanted to let everyone know.
Wow. Every episode, huh? Yeah. So
it's not a joke. It's reality.
Yeah, that's it.
We're going to distribute it. I was going to have Tucker Carlson take care of the distribution for me, but now that he's not with Fox News anymore, I'm going to have to find someone else to distribute it for me. So he was going to advertise it on his show for us.
So now that we've had that update, so that kind of concludes our episode today of representation. If you like something we said, give us a comment. If you dislike something we said, you want to argue about something we said, feel free, comment.
Tell us who your favorite autistic character is.
Yeah, tell us who your favorite autistic character is. Tell us what kind of representation of autism you want to see, as well as if there's anything else you want to talk about or there's another topic you want us to cover, drop us a line. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. Also, if you can listen to us, I know most people have their own preferences of where to listen to us on for podcasts, but try to go to Spotify. Just saying.
Also, feel free to DM us if you want the recipe for the tincture. I will be distributing
autism cure.
That's right. There's been several mothers who have contacted me already, and they're claiming excellent results. So,
oh, Jesus. Well, all right. Thank you very much. We will talk to you at another time.